We've seen that cumulative sentences can be described in terms of whether their free modifying phrases come at the beginning of the sentence before the base clause in the initial or left branching position, in the medial position between the subject and the verb of the base clause, at the end of the sentence after the base clause, in the final or right branching position, or in some combination of these three positions. It may help to think of this aspect of cumulative form as being syntagmatic, a term we previously applied to the way in which a sentence unfolds its meaning horizontally to the eye of the reader from the left of the page to the right. There's also what can be called a paradigmatic or vertical aspect of cumulative sentences. This aspect is conceptual or logical rather than visual, as it focuses on the discursive relationship between and among cumulative free modifying phrases, irrespective of their placement. Or to put this another way, the syntagmatic aspect or characteristic of cumulative sentences is strictly formal, determined by where a modifying phrase is placed, while the paradigmatic aspect is strictly functional, determined by what each modifying phrase does. I realize this may sound both a little confusing and unnecessarily technical, but it really does help us understand how to build cumulative sentences if we understand these two important aspects. Each cumulative modifying phrase means that the sentence takes another step. But we need to realize that each step itself has two aspects or dimensions or purposes. Each step moves the sentence toward the period at the sentence's end, but each step also adds a new level of detail or explanation. I think an example can really help here. Consider the sentence, having sold all of her boxes of cookies, the elated Girl Scout went home. Now, in syntagmatic terms, we would describe this cumulative sentence as having its modifying phrase, having sold all of her boxes of cookies, in the initial or left branching position. In paradigmatic terms, we would describe this cumulative sentence as having two levels. The first being the base clause, the second being its single modifying phrase, having sold all of her boxes of cookies. Each level of a cumulative sentence adds to its information, making the sentence both more specific and more intellectually satisfying. So far, so good. I'm pretty sure the previous example helps us understand the difference between the syntagmatic and the paradigmatic aspects of cumulative sentences. But now we need to look at another example that may complicate things again. Consider a more extended or elaborated version of our Girl Scout cookie sentence. Instead of just having one modifying phrase, having sold all of her boxes of cookies, the elated Girl Scout went home, let's give our reader more information. Let's say, having sold all of her boxes of cookies, the elated Girl Scout went home, so excited she could barely explain her success to her mother. In syntagmatic terms, we now have a sentence with cumulative modifying phrases in both the initial and the final position. But in paradigmatic terms, we now have a sentence with two second-level modifying phrases. Let's try to diagram this relation using a simple diagramming scheme I introduced several lectures ago. In this scheme, the base clause of the sentence is always the first level, and we indicate this by starting at our left margin and putting a 1 before the base clause wherever it appears in the sentence. And any modifying phrase that modifies a part or all of the base clause is a second level. And we indicate this by indenting and putting a 2 before that modifying phrase and before however many other modifying phrases there may be that also modify a part of or all of the base clause. Accordingly, we could visually represent our original sentence as second level, having sold all of her boxes of cookies, base clause, first level, the elated Girl Scout went home. And our extended sentence would look like this. Second level, having sold all of her boxes of cookies, the elated Girl Scout went home, another second level, so excited she could barely explain her success to her mother. As long as our modifying phrases all point to or modify a part or all of the base clause, we just repeat this pattern no matter how many second-level phrases there are. For instance, we could have second level, having sold all of her boxes of cookies, another second level, having knocked on every door in her neighborhood, base clause, the elated Girl Scout went home, another second level, so excited she could barely explain her success to her mother, or another second level, so proud of her accomplishment she immediately wanted to get more cookies to sell. Now, we still have a two-level cumulative, but now with 4 second-level modifying phrases. And here's where we need a new term. We call a cumulative sentence with more than one second-level modifying phrase a coordinate cumulative sentence. All of its modifying phrases point back to the base clause, and any one of them would make sense if moved to any of the 3 syntagmatic positions: the initial before the base clause, the medial in the middle of the base clause, or the final just after the base clause. So we could rearrange the steps of the above sentence in more ways than I'm about to demonstrate, but just to give you an idea of the possibilities, we might write, first level, the elated Girl Scout went home, second level, having sold all of her boxes of cookies, another second level, having knocked on every door in her neighborhood, another second level, so excited she could barely explain her success to her mother, and another second level, so proud of her accomplishment she immediately wanted to get more cookies to sell. Or we could do it this way. Second level, having sold all of her boxes of cookies, another second level, having knocked on every door in her neighborhood, another second level, so excited she could barely explain her success to her mother, another second level, so proud of her accomplishment she immediately wanted to get more cookies to sell, and then finally the base clause, the elated Girl Scout went home. Or there are all sorts of variations that would be in between these extremes, such as having sold all of her boxes of cookies, having knocked on every door in her neighborhood, so excited she could barely explain her success to her mother, the elated Girl Scout went home. So proud of her accomplishment, she immediately wanted to get more cookies to sell. No matter how much we rearrange the syntagmatic order of this sentence's steps, the paradigmatic order remains the same. It's a 2-level sentence with 4 second-level modifying phrases. Okay, so why is this important to know? First of all, we need to call this pattern something, because cumulative syntax also makes possible 2 other patterns of logical relationships among base clauses and modifying phrases. And each pattern is more effective in some situations and for some purposes than it is for others. The 3 paradigmatic patterns of the cumulative sentence are called coordinate, subordinate, and mixed. In coordinate patterns, all modifying phrases refer back to the base clause. In subordinate patterns, each modifying phrase refers to the immediately preceding clause or phrase. And we can mix these 2 patterns by adding subordinate levels to coordinate patterns, or coordinate levels to subordinate patterns, with one or the other pattern predominating. Secondly, what's true of both patterns is that they show us how to add levels of new meaning to our sentences. You'll remember that a coordinate cumulative sentence looks like this when diagrammed. First level, the elated Girl Scout went home. Second level, having sold all of her boxes of cookies. Second level, having knocked on every door in her neighborhood. Second level, so excited she could barely explain her success to her mother. Second level, so proud of her accomplishment, she immediately wanted to get more cookies to sell. The subordinate pattern goes a little bit different. Base clause, the elated Girl Scout went home. Second level, having sold all of her boxes of cookies. Third level, those inescapable icons of capitalism. Fourth level, its methods and assumptions hardwiring our children to value the power of selling in almost their every activity. And a fifth level, methods and assumptions championed by some and resisted by others. Now, you'll notice that both of these sentences take 4 steps after the base clause, but each step in the first sentence just gives it another second level, while each step in the second sentence adds a new level of meaning, ultimately developing the sentence through 5 levels of specificity. And of course, for the mixed version of a cumulative sentence, we would get a first level, the elated Girl Scout went home. Second level, so excited she could barely explain her success to her mother. Another second level, having sold all of her boxes of cookies. A third level, those inescapable icons of capitalism. Another third level, those irresistible sugar bombs. Back to a second level, having knocked on every door in her neighborhood. Another third level, recognizing some who came to their doors as friends of her parents. Another third level, remembering some houses where she had gotten particularly wonderful Halloween treats. And now a fourth level, figuring both categories of potential buyers would find it hard to say no to a cute little girl participating in one of America's best established cultural rituals. So now that you've seen what these 3 patterns look like when roughly diagrammed in terms of their levels, let's describe them and think about them a little bit more thoroughly. Coordinate levels can be thought of as modifying the entire base clause or as focusing on one of its elements. Given a base clause containing a subject, a verb, and a direct object, the coordinate modifying levels may sharpen or focus on the whole clause, on its subject, on its verb, or on its object. Coordinate levels keep the sentence running in place as more information is added to its load. I've used some of these examples before, but now I hope you'll see them in a new light, representing not just the cumulative sentence, but the coordinate cumulative sentence. Here's some examples. He drove the car carefully, never speeding, never running red lights, always looking both ways at intersections, always defensive. He drove the car, turning down the old country road, shifting into first gear as his speed slowed, absently glancing at the farms on either side of him, desperately wondering what to do next. He drove the car, his shaggy hair whipped by the wind, his eyes hidden behind wraparound mirror shades, his mouth set in a grim smile, a .38 police special on the seat beside him, and you know what's stuffed in that trunk. He drove the car, a rusted old yellow and cream-colored Rambler, a relic from the days when a car's weight meant as much as did its mileage, a purchase he had often questioned, an impulse buy he had never really understood, but had never regretted. And, of course, if we add information to the base clause, if we add more information to it, we give ourselves more targets for modification, more opportunities for adding modifying phrases, as we would get if the base clause, for instance, instead of reading, he drove carefully, would read, he carefully drove the rented car back toward town. Subordinate levels move the focus of the sentence forward, moving from general to specific, zooming in like a movie camera. They can also break a whole into its constituent parts, accomplishing the same end as do some uses of the colon. Subordinate levels can also lead us into new thoughts, nudging us to be ever more specific, to refine and or detail whatever we have just written. However, these subordinate levels can also run amok. taking us away from our subject, diverting attention to subsidiary, incidental, even irrelevant details, details for which we have no real need or use, being ever mindful of our readers' time and patience. Patience we run the risk of sorely taxing with sentences such as this one, sentences that seem to go on and on, moving us further and further from what we started to say, making the subordinate form seem more and more aimless. He drove carefully, trying to protect his old Rambler, a rusted yellow and cream-colored classic sedan, one with Rambler's legendary reclining seats, seats intended to make driving more relaxing, a good design intention with a number of side effects, some not relaxing at all, side effects that made him the envy of every boy in his high school class. He drove carefully, one hand on the wheel, the other hand holding a sandwich, a ham and cheese fossil, a strangely colored lump made 3 days before by his sister, a simple, trusting woman, someone who deserved a better life than fate had dealt her, a life of happiness, if not of success, the basic happiness of feeling loved and needed. He drove carefully, his thoughts drifting back to other trips, fondly remembered Sunday outings, outings made wonderful by his mother and father, warm and humorous parents he would never see again. They drove carefully. He with hands on the wheel in the prescribed position at 10 and 2, his eyes riveted to the road, a road almost invisible beyond the sheets of rain that pelted the windshield. She checking and rechecking the map, calling out town names and possible landmarks, landmarks neither could possibly see, both growing more tense and worried by the minute, neither able to say anything soothing or encouraging, their vacation dissolving into a nightmare of bad weather and wrong turns. The main appeal and power of coordinate cumulative construction comes from its distinctive rhythm and very simple logical relations among the steps the sentence takes. The coordinate cumulative sentence tends to be repetitive, both in sound and in sense. And, as Gertrude Stein rightly pointed out, repetition in language takes on an insistent quality. Moreover, the coordinate cumulative sentence is sort of like a car stopped at a stoplight but revving its motor. All the new information added by each coordinate level adds detail to, helps explain the base clause, but never moves it forward. Call it motion without movement. The coordinate syntax is essentially static, going over the same information again and again, refining it or clarifying it with each new pass or each new modifying phrase, backfilling rather than moving forward. And yet, a coordinate sentence whose modifying phrases follow a sequence can seem to move, indeed can display what I think is the most seductive prose rhythm of cumulative form. Christensen singles out a sentence from E.B. White to illustrate this strength. We caught 2 bass, hauling them in briskly as though they were mackerel, pulling them over the side of the boat in a businesslike manner without any landing net, stunning them with a blow on the back of the head. I love the sound of this sentence, and I love the way it reminds me of that John Steinbeck discussion of 2 ways of looking at the Mexican Sierra that I cited in my second lecture. This is clearly a sentence that evokes the experiential relationship between fish and fisherman, rather than resorting to labeling the dead, stiff, formalin-smelling fish by counting its spines. Joan Didion is a master of the cumulative sentence in general. And here's a fine coordinate cumulative sentence from her. Mysteriously and rather giddily splendid, hidden in a grove of sycamores just above the Pacific Coast Highway in Malibu, a commemoration of high culture so immediately productive of crowds and jammed traffic that it can now be approached by appointment only, The $17 million villa built by the late J. Paul Getty to house his antiquities and paintings and furniture manages to strike a peculiar nerve in almost everyone who sees it. The main appeal of subordinate cumulative construction comes from its ability to advance the sentence into new territory, making it particularly effective when used to describe a process or to follow something that unfolds in time. As opposed to the rigid and unmovable logic of the coordinate cumulative sentence, where every new modifying phrase ties back to the base clause, the subordinate cumulative sentence is loosey-goosey and can move on to new information. Of course, as I mentioned before, that freedom to move forward can reach a point of diminishing returns when or if subordinate modifying phrases move so far away from the base clause that it looks as if the sentence has run wild. Now, it turns out it's actually hard to find pure examples of subordinate cumulative sentences, where every new modifying phrase adds a new level to the sentence. Indeed, Christensen only came up with a couple of examples of pure subordinate construction, although his first example from Sinclair Lewis is quite impressive. He dipped his hands in the bichloride solution and shook them. A quick shake, fingers down, like the fingers of a pianist above the keys. That's a 4-level subordinate cumulative sentence. Pure subordinate cumulative sentences, particularly those that develop through more than 3 levels, are difficult to find in part because the circumstances that call for such a pure construction are as rare as they are hard to imagine. Accordingly, most subordinate cumulative sentences are really just dominantly or primarily subordinate rather than exclusively so. 2 examples. The first from A.S. Byatt, the second from Toni Morrison, show what I mean. Here's the Byatt sentence. He lit on an image, a woman in a library, a woman not naked but voluminously clothed, concealed in rustling silk and petticoats, fingers folded over the place where the tight black silk bodice met the springing skirts, a woman whose face was sweet and sad, a stiff bonnet framing loops of thick hair. And here's the Toni Morrison sentence. The clarinets had trouble because the brass was cut so fine, not low down the way they loved to do it, but high and fine like a young girl singing by the side of a creek, passing time, her ankles cold in the water. And the main appeal of mixed cumulative construction is that it combines the strength of both coordinate and subordinate forms, allowing the sentence to move forward in time and open up new ideas, while also maintaining its intensity and focus. Here's a mixed cumulative sentence from Joseph Heller that shows what I mean. He worked without pause, taking the faucet apart, spreading all the tiny pieces out carefully, counting and then studying each one interminably as though he had never seen anything remotely similar before, and then reassembling the whole small apparatus over and over and over again with no loss of patience or interest, no sign of fatigue, no indication of ever concluding. It's worth noting that the mixed cumulative form can easily draw from the sound and logical advantages of coordinate form, most obviously when the mixed cumulative sentence stresses parallelism of sound or structure. In Freestyle, Chris Anderson cites a Lauren Isley sentence that sounds and feels more coordinate than mixed precisely because its 6 modifying phrases balance 3 parallel second levels against 3 parallel third levels. I used to park my car on a hill and sit silently observant, listening to the talk ringing out from neighbor to neighbor, seeing the inhabitants drowsing in their doorways, taking it all in with nostalgia. The sage smell of the wind, the sunlight without time, the village without destiny. It should be apparent to some of your ears by now that I'm a real fan of balanced or duple rhythms in prose. I love their sound and firmly believe that balance appeals to the mind as well as the ear. Its extended parallels and matchups, easy to follow and hard to forget. One of the many benefits of cumulative syntax is that it points us toward parallel constructions and actually generates sound balances. That sentence by Isley is the kind of thing that just starts happening with ever greater frequency as we write more cumulative sentences. But for my money, the real master of mixed cumulative rhythms is F. Scott Fitzgerald, as we can hear in the following stunning sentences from The Great Gatsby. Her face was sad and lovely with bright things in it, bright eyes and a bright, passionate mouth. But there was an excitement in her voice that men who had cared for her found difficult to forget. A singing compulsion, a whispered listen, a promise that she had done gay, exciting things just a while since, and that there were gay, exciting things hovering in the next hour. Here's another great one. Slenderly, languidly, their hands set lightly on their hips, the two young women preceded us out onto a rosy-colored porch, open toward the sunset where 4 candles flickered on the table in the diminished wind. And another. Perhaps some unbelievable guest would arrive, a person infinitely rare and to be marveled at, some authentically radiant young girl who with one fresh glance at Gatsby, one moment of magical encounter would blot out those 5 years of unwavering devotion. And there was a ripe mystery about it, a hint of bedrooms upstairs more beautiful and cool than other bedrooms, of gay and radiant activities taking place through its corridors, and of romances that were not musty and laid away already in lavender, but fresh and breathing and redolent of this year's shining motor cars, and of dances whose flowers were scarcely withered. And believe me, there are plenty more where those came from. In this lecture, I've tried to show how the steps cumulative sentences take, each modifying phrase a new step, fall into 3 main categories, each category displaying different logical relations between and among the base clause and modifying phrases, each category having different rhythms and different strengths. We've looked at coordinate cumulative sentences where all the modifying phrases point back to the base clause, and any one of which makes sense if moved just before or just after the base clause. These coordinate cumulatives can be thought of as 2-level sentences with all of their second-level modifying phrases pointing back to the first level of the base clause. If we try to visually represent coordinate cumulative sentences numbering their levels, they look like this. First level, he grabbed her hand. Second level, his heart pounding. Second level, his knees shaking. Second level, his head spinning. Second level, his palms sweating. Second level, his fright slowly fading away. Or they look like this. Second level, the game and the entire season on the line. Base clause. He stepped up to the home plate. Second level. A hulking giant who suddenly seemed a bit smaller. Another one. The chalk lines around the plate barely visible to his squinting eyes. His face dripping nervous sweat. Grim determination evident in his every move. Barely hearing the crowd chant his name. Tightly gripping his bat. All too aware that in a few moments he would be a hero or a heel. We've seen subordinate cumulative sentences where the modifying phrases are pretty much locked in place below or after the level of the sentence they modify, with modifying phrases after the second level, each taking the phrase before it to a new level of information or explanation. If we try to visually represent subordinate cumulative sentences numbering their levels, they look like this, their levels looking much like stair steps. First level, his business plan was a joke. Second, little more than a childish dream, first formed when he was 8. Third, old enough to realize the advantage of having lots of money. Fourth, advantages such as being able to buy every comic book in the store. And a fifth level, the comic store itself representing to his young mind fabulous success. And we've seen mixed cumulative sentences where some modifying phrases follow the coordinate pattern and some follow the subordinate pattern. If we try to visually represent mixed cumulative sentences numbering their levels, they look like this. Cumulative sentences can take any number of forms, detailing both frozen or static scenes and moving processes, their insistent rhythm always asking for another modifying phrase, allowing us to achieve ever greater degrees of specificity and precision, a process of focusing the sentence in much the same way a movie camera can focus and refocus on a scene, zooming in for a close-up to reveal almost microscopic detail, panning back to offer a wide-angle panorama, offering new angles or perspectives from which to examine a scene or consider an idea. Understanding the way each of these three cumulative patterns works makes it easier for us to write extended cumulative sentences. Perhaps more important, understanding the concept of sentence levels can be very important, immediately giving writers reachable goals for improving their writing. It may be a bit of an oversimplification, but generally speaking, one mark of inexperienced or ineffective writing is that it relies heavily on sentences of only one or two levels. Just adding one new level of information to our sentences, whether the modifying phrase we add follows the coordinate or the subordinate pattern, means that our sentences will contain more information, more detail, better explanation. In short, adding even a single new level to our characteristic sentence will make them more effective both in terms of their sound and in terms of their sense. This is as close to magic as writing gets. And if we can start composing the occasional cumulative sentence that contains several more modifying phrases and or several new levels, we start thinking and writing much more effectively and frequently much more elegantly.